What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Corner podcast, the show where I bring on guests from all different backgrounds to talk all the things mental health. I'm your host, Harry Potvin, and as you can see, I am not in my studio right now. I don't have the camera, I don't have the microphone. I had to do an urgent delivery for work all the way up in Timmins, and if you were from Ontario, around the Durham region, you'll know that that's pretty far. It's about 7 or 8 hours, and I got told at 4:30 p.m. to go. So I stopped halfway. I'm in North Bay right now, just in a hotel. It's pretty nice. I can't complain. It's a little snowy, so I figured I'd play it safe and kind of just crash for the night. But right back to driving in the morning. Anyway, shout out if you're listening from North Bay. Shout out to everyone from North Bay. Come through, it's a party. I'm kidding. You're going to see this the next morning anyway, so it doesn't even matter. So for this episode of the show, I am joined by Dr. Denise Fournier. Denise has been helping people overcome their challenges for over a decade. Her therapy and coaching has included helping at-risk youth aging out of foster care, delivering education and crisis response services to immigrant families, and offering support services to LGBTQ young people and their families. Denise was such a blast to have on, and I really want to thank her again for coming on and having this discussion with me. Now, before we get into the episode today, guys, you know what to do. If you're listening, please like, comment, share, subscribe, give 5 stars if you're on that podcast platform. Share with someone who might want to hear this episode. It's a really great one, and I can't wait for you to listen. I am very tired. Wish me luck on this drive, and I will see you all very soon. Peace. We're good to go. Denise, what's going on? Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So the first question I want to ask you, where does your interest in mental health start? Like what inspired you to go on this journey into the mental health field?
Wow, that's a really good question. My interest in pursuing this as a profession really started with my own experience of coming to an understanding of what mental health is and what mental health support feels and looks like. I had some traumas early in life, some difficult life experiences in childhood, and I came from a family that's rooted in cultural traditions that are very much kind of stiff upper lip, be strong in the face of anything, don't talk about your problems, outside the family. Inside the family, there was a lot of stoicism and just not a lot of space for talking through or holding, any sort of space for emotional difficulties. So I just sort of held in all of this stuff that I was going through for many, many years. And then at 18, went on what was actually kind of a spiritual or religious retreat. And part of the experience were these talk circles, which really were kind of group therapy. And that was the first time in my life that I talked about any of what was going on in my life and in my home, and was listened to and was heard. And there wasn't any professional support, but there was just this group dynamic of people holding the space for emotions to be shared and for me to be where I was at in my experience. And so that was just profoundly moving. And that happened right before I went to college. And so I took a psychology class because I was interested in what that was about. And just the combination of those two things set me on that path. So from there, I studied psychology in undergrad, went on to grad school, and went on to pursue this as a profession. So of course, as I went on learning academically and having experiences, in the mental health field, I got more and more inspired, but the seeds of it were really in my own life and experience.
Right. And how did it feel to finally let those emotions out? Like there was this one time when I was in high school where I was on this like leadership exec board, and at the end of our leadership camp, we went in a circle and we told each other our feelings or something. And I remember never doing that before, and I started crying before I even said anything. I was like, I don't even know what's going on. Like, what the hell? It's like a switch turned on. So for you, was it like something similar when you finally opened up about this stuff?
It was exactly that. I mean, it was literally and metaphorically this watershed moment of just, oh, I can let this go. But it was also so vulnerable because I felt really out of control. And like you, it was like just the idea that this was happening, even before I told my story or got in touch with like what I was actually feeling and parsed that out. It was just this overwhelming release of emotions. And it felt super exposing for sure. It felt really vulnerable, especially because at least what I think happened was that I was around people who had this already, like in their homes with their parents,
Mm,
So for a lot of people, it wasn't that new. So, or other people, like it wasn't that deep because we were young. So they weren't having a whole lot of feelings, So
right.
I felt really exposed and vulnerable. And I remember also feeling a little weird, a little different because it was so intense for me. So it was a combination of things for sure. For
Right.
sure.
Yeah. The other kids are sitting around. They're like, why is she crying?
What's up with that girl?
It's not that big of a deal, man.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm still that girl, I think.
yeah, I'm still that guy too. I'll be crying at everything. They're like, what's
Yeah,
wrong with
right.
you, man? Yeah. Now when you finally opened up to this group of people, did that then motivate you or push you to open up to family and friends, or was that still kind of an iffy subject on that part?
Yeah, that's a really good question. No, I mean, it didn't, and it still doesn't. I learned through probably not even then through that experience, but throughout the course of my experiences that my family is not the well to draw from for those kinds of things.
Uh,
There are certain family members whom I can count upon to do that with, and they are the family members who are doing work themselves on themselves. And really kind of coming to understand intergenerational patterns, and doing their own kind of deep work. And so they understand, and they can relate, and they're a safe space. But not everybody in my family is. I mean, I tried, I did try, and
right.
what I what I encountered was really more of the same of what I felt was there growing up. And so I eventually learned to stop going there for emotional support, and seeking it from other places, and having those conversations in other spaces that felt safer and were safer for me.
Right. Now, did that motivate you to keep going in the field that you're working in now? Like that, not rejection, but that kind of hesitancy to open up to family?
Yeah, for sure. It was a big influence, and it was a big conflict too, because when I decided to pursue this as a profession, because I said, there's a lot of cultural stuff going on, in my family that kind of influenced that experience that I had in the context that I grew up in. And that extended to a lot of judgment about therapy. And so, because there's this tradition of like, you don't talk about your problems with strangers, you don't talk about things outside the house, and there's so much stigma around mental illness and, mental health stuff and having problems, it's so stigmatized that when I said this was what I wanted to go into as a profession, there was a lot of criticism, there was a lot of judgment, a lot of skepticism. To this day, it's funny because this is what I do, and I'm out there as a professional in mental health, and I've thankfully had success in this field. And a lot of my family members, they don't get it, or they don't want to get it, or they don't ask. So it was inspiring in that way, because I figured if this is happening in my home, this is happening in homes everywhere, right? This is happening for people everywhere. And so it was a big part of the inspiration to keep going.
So when you finally became a therapist, like officially, like do you remember the first clients you had? Like was it kind of weird to, because this is an interesting topic, right? Like you hear all the time about the patients going in to see therapists, but you
Mm.
very rarely hear it from the therapist point of view. So was it like weird being on the opposite end of that chair?
Such a good question. I really appreciate that question, because it's getting me to think about my first clients. And that was a while ago already. Yeah, I worked in my first job, my first encounters with clients were in the foster care system. I worked with kids who were getting ready to age out of the foster care system here in South Florida, where I live in the US. And we were working with severely mentally ill youth who were growing up in foster homes and getting ready to presumably launch into independence. And so our job was to counsel those kids and those families to support that transition, but also to determine their readiness to be able to transition. And so I was seeing really severe and profound cases at the individual level, but also at the systemic level, because I was seeing what was happening in the homes, in the foster homes. I was seeing what was happening in the mental health system. I was seeing what was happening in the foster care system. So I was kind of like seeing how the sausage was made, so to speak, and getting this really sort of broad scale view. And it was really disorienting for me, because I had to sort of be able to see a person inside of all of this. And I remember that it was really confusing for me as a really green clinician, going into these spaces and trying to figure out like, what's the most important thing here. And my teachers and my supervisors who were guiding and advising me through this process, they had certain clinical agendas, things that they wanted me to be looking at and diagnosing and assessing and all of those things. And then I was beholden to all these other systems that wanted me to assess for all these other factors and look for all these other things. And I just was guided by my heart. And I remember for a really long time that I felt that was wrong as a clinician. And I'm really grateful now that I am a more seasoned, professional and more seasoned therapist. I understand that there is a place for heart in this work, and there needs to be a place for heart in this work. And I think had I not been on the other side of it as a client, had I not understood how vulnerable it is to sit across from a professional, who's looking at you and assessing you. And like, even more so for these kids that I was working at, the stakes were high for them. And so it was really intimidating experience for them, a really confusing experience for them. And I think had I not been able to tap into that, it certainly wouldn't have been a really successful experience for my clients, maybe successful on other levels, but not for them. So I'm really grateful that I had the experience of being a client first, especially given that that was my initial kind of introduction to this work, to this field.
Right. Yeah. No, that it's so underrated, right? The heart portion, like I talk about it all the time. I had 7 therapists, but the first 6, like they went on that clinical approach, and they kind of looked at their notepad, they were taking notes, and they didn't really listen to what you were saying. And then I was like, there is no connection here. Like, we might get to the symptoms that I have and the diagnoses that I have, but I don't feel good at all. That was the biggest thing.
Totally. I mean, I have the privilege of training, clinicians who are coming up and developing their skills. And I always remind people, humble yourself to recognize that you're having a human experience with another human being. You're sitting across from another like fellow journeyer in life, and you are one too. You are a human being as well as a clinician, and your job is to show up in your humanness with this other person, because that trust and connection between therapist and client, that's the secret sauce of therapy. It's not the tools and skills, and research supports that. You could be the most skilled clinician in your graduating class. You could be the best of the best in terms of, your diagnostic abilities, or, your acumen in a certain tradition or, approach to therapy. But if you don't have that ability to really resonate with somebody on the human level and connect, you're not going to have their trust, and you're not going to have their openness in the process. And so their ability to gain from the process is going to be stunted. When you do have that, so much transpires, because at the end of the day, a big part of this is us wanting and needing to be seen and to be heard and to be understood. And if you're so caught up in your note taking or trying to get the intervention right in the moment, or show off your skills and show yourself off as a professional, which happens in these spaces, then you're not going to do much good, real good.
Yeah, I actually had a moment like that with one of them where they were like showing off their skills, and I was like, that's cool, man. I'm still sad.
Right.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Great.
Oh man. And then I left, and I was like, I'm never going there again.
That's how it happens. And it's tragic, because the fact that you kept going is tremendous, and really shows your willingness to get support for yourself, and your willingness to really get what you need. Because how many people give up after one crappy therapist, so many, and they never go back. And you can ruin it for someone for life. You can ruin mental health treatment for someone for life if you're not really being mindful of how you're showing up for that person in that space. And it happens all the time. People give up on therapy and really give up on themselves in that way.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate predicament because I was in I guess I'm just stubborn, but like I kept going, but like after the first person I was like, oh, that's therapy, that's what that is, like this is garbage, you know, because
Who
they
wants
just
that?
they just gave me a prescription for medication and said good luck, and I was like, that's what helps people. And then you have a bunch of these people who, you know, I mean, it's like every job, not everyone is going to fit for you, like that's not, it's so unrealistic, but we somehow have that ideology that every therapist has all the answers for everybody, which is just not like in nowhere else in the world is that valid, and we just
So
think
true.
it works for therapy. But you know, you go to the one, it doesn't work, you guys don't click, you think there's something wrong with you forever, you just kind of assume that you're uncurable.
It's so true. It's so true. It's so easy and to turn it against yourself because it's so vulnerable, right? I mean, I always encourage clients, advocate for yourself, interview therapists, check in with how you actually feel. When you're on the phone with this person making the appointment or you're having a consultation, what do you feel in your body? What are you actually experiencing? That matters. Follow that. And yeah, we can tell people that, but you and I both know how vulnerable it feels to sit through an hour-long therapy session. So to have to like do that, and then if it doesn't work, do it again. It's like, man, it takes fortitude, and that is part of the process, right? Because not everybody's going to be a fit, and so often you do have to go through a few before you find the one that's best for you, or at least best for you in the moment with what you're going through. It takes a lot to get to that point, for sure.
Yeah. I think the worst part about doing it with all these different people, and I'm sure you can relate, is that you always start from point like the first day. So you get there and they're like, "Where does this start?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh my god, I have to."
Again.
You guys don't have like you're all taking notes. Is there no file on me? Like,
It's right. Well, it's funny you say that because I always start my initial session with clients always starts the same. Like, I want you to start with me wherever it feels like the beginning for you, given what you're experiencing right now. I don't need you to start at birth and give me your whole life story because you've done that with other therapists before, and we're going to get the context we need. So like as we go in the conversation organically, like things are going to come up and you're going to want to tell me more. And like the conversation is going to get us there, but we don't need to start there. Like, let's start wherever is going to have you leaving this session feeling like it was a good idea to come here today and feeling like you're starting to get relief for whatever you're experiencing now, because I've had to start at the beginning so many times with therapists, and it makes me crazy because especially, yeah, if you're auditioning someone, then it's like, all right, so that was an hour of me saying the same thing I've said a million times, and now it's not going to work. So I'm just going to have to go somewhere else and do it again. I'm not really getting therapy. I'm just rehearsing the same stupid
seriously.
story.
By like the fifth or sixth, you're like, all right, here's the gist, and you just like I've
So,
done this before. You're a seasoned pro. Oh my god!
for
But then
sure.
like doing that, like I love the approach that you have because that makes it so much more organic as opposed to like I'm not saying there's I'm not a therapist, so what can I say? But I'm not saying there's anything wrong because some people like that approach where it's like start me at the beginning because some people have that mentality where it's like they work better chronologically. But for me anyway, it kind of just set the tone for the whole session. I was like, oh, okay, we're gonna, this is gonna be very, what's it called? This is gonna be very structured. I'm more of an organic kind of all over the place guy. That's what, like for me with the seventh therapist, what she did, she just sat there and was like, let's talk. And I just started spewing random crap. And I was like, this feels a lot better because there's a lot of people like me who don't like that whole structured approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I always remind people like, we're not here on my agenda. So if somebody prefers structure, of course, if I'm outside the scope of my practice, I'm outside the scope of my practice. I'm going to tell you that, and I'm not the right person for you. But if I have the skills to be able to facilitate an approach that feels better for you, then that's the approach we're going to take. So if somebody says like, I want to start at the beginning because that's going to help me and how my brain works, great, let's do that, and so I'm going to hold the space however it's going to support the person in front of me. And I'm going to be one step behind them. I'm holding a certain degree of expertise in the room, but you're the expert on your own experience. And if I'm not regarding and acknowledging that, including how you want to process things, then we're not going to gel, and this isn't going to be successful because then you're going to be beholden to me and how I'm dictating this. And for sure, you're not going to get what you need already, because of how I've sort of dominated things. So I try to always, kind of just be mindful of who's in front of me and how they want to work. And if it works that way, then that's how we do it. Otherwise, we kind of just go organically, like you said.
Right. Yeah. I love that. Now, how long, I read this up. How long have you been, like, long officially have you been working in the mental health field?
So I started working as a researcher and a research assistant in 2000. Gosh, this is really aging me.
Yeah, sorry.
2003.
Yeah.
And then I started working with clients officially as a therapist in 2007. So I've been in the like psychology field since '02. I don't know how many years. I guess it's almost 20 years. Next year will be 20 years. And then as a therapist since '07. However long that's been.
Yeah. Sorry for giving you that aging.
You're good. You're good. I'm actually not. I started young, so thankfully it doesn't age me, I guess, that much. But yeah, it surprises me to realize how long it's been, actually.
Yeah, it's like a blink and it's done kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, within the last 20 years, like you've been on the front lines studying this stuff and seeing it firsthand. Have you noticed any specific trends in terms of like the mental health? I don't want to say crisis, but like the trends either downward or upward in terms of mental health with your clients? Like, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? I know with the pandemic, it's probably inflamed, but do you notice any trends?
That's a really great question. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not something, I'm thinking of it on the fly as you're asking me this, which I so appreciate your questions because they get me to really think. What I am noticing is that the stigma around mental illness or seeking support for mental health is definitely reducing. And that's an incredible thing. And with that is coming a lot more conversation and a lot more dialogue around mental health and mental health challenges, which by and large is a good thing. It's generating a lot more awareness, around this stuff. And visibility, which by and large is a really good thing. So I think it's trending in that direction of more dialogue, more understanding, and more awareness. With that, though, it's like this in our individual process too. And this, where it's like self-awareness is a double-sided coin, right? So with more self-awareness is more opportunity to address things and work on things. But it's like, if you've got a messy room and the lights are out, it's like, okay, the room's messy, but like, you don't have to see it, but you turn the lights on. Okay, now you got to look at this stuff. And the front end of that, before you start to sort things out, that can be really daunting, right? So I think what's happening for a lot of people is as they're looking at themselves, as they're looking at the world with all this information that they have now that they didn't have before, it's a bit more kind of like messy and challenging. And I think we're seeing this, like I see a lot of these like TikTok trends, where people are self-diagnosing or like everyone has ADHD now and everyone's a narcissist now and everyone's in a toxic relationship now. And, everything's about boundaries to the point that we're edging out like intimacy and we're edging out like just the messiness of being in relationship as two imperfect human beings figuring it out, so we're going to these kind of extremes, I think, as we get more understanding and awareness and as we're trying to like grapple with the complexity of the human experience. And so I think that's where we're at right now. And it's certainly a testament to how far things have moved in the direction of destigmatizing, mental illness and bringing awareness to mental health. Great. But we've got more work to do to kind of like refine what we make of this stuff. And I think we have to be really careful right now about how we disseminate information and how we talk about this stuff, because we could alienate people or we could really isolate people. We could really confuse people and we could really kind of muddle things up in a way that isn't necessarily helpful.
I think the other thing that I found anyway is that exactly to your point, the self-awareness is a double-edged sword. I found that when you just said a perfect example where you're like, everyone has ADHD, everyone has this, everyone has that. That almost, not to everybody, but to some people, that almost discredits what they're dealing with. It's kind of like oh, everyone's got that, you're fine kind of situation. So there's certain people that'll see that and go, oh, then what I'm dealing with isn't a problem that I need to address.
100%. Yes, that's such a good point. I've seen this recently, actually. I had a young client the other day who was really frustrated because he deals with generalized anxiety disorder and, a pretty, severe manifestation of it, and has a lot of challenges in his daily life and is really doing a lot of work to manage that. And his dad, keeps sending him text messages like, hey, have you tried, like this supplement, or, just try breathing exercises. And so, we're kind of unpacking this, like, think about the context your dad is in, where, this is the conversation now about anxiety that, like, everyone has it and everyone deals with anxiety. And we think we know what we mean when we use a word like anxiety. But that, just because that's his understanding of it and that's what works for him, doesn't mean that that's your experience. And, he's isolated by this, he's alienated by this, and he feels othered and he feels minimized, and he doesn't feel seen in his challenges, which are real, and not the same as the next person who, might experience some level of anxiety.
Right. That's the craziest thing about mental health challenges is the layers. It's just absolute insanity. It's just
For sure.
like there's so many, like for you, how do you even like there's so many things to consider. How do you kind of laser in and know what you're dealing with a patient?
That's a that's a good a way of framing it and asking the question, because it is this really multi-layered, complex experience of seeing the person and seeing the person in their environment and seeing the influence of so many different factors, from biology to culture and society to, social media, and trying to understand all of that and trying to prioritize, and sort of work through the influence of all of those things and see how they're manifesting. And so, that's a set of skills, and that you kind of refine as a therapist, is to work with all of that. I mean, my background, I have master's and license in mental health counseling, and I have a PhD in marriage and family therapy. And marriage and family therapy is specifically looking at people inside of their relationships and their relationship systems, and understanding people in the context of their experience based on all of the different systems they participate in their lives. And so that training has really helped me to look at things in a really sort of nuanced way and contextualized way. And that helps a lot, because you do have to sort of see things in a broad perspective, but then kind of distill things down so that you can be grounded in, in the room with somebody and look at what the most important stuff is. And so it's tricky, it's not something that lends itself to very simple explanations or answers, but certainly that is part of the work, is kind of sifting through all that stuff and looking at all of that complexity in a way that, that works and facilitates progress and productive conversations in therapy.
Right. Now, with all those tools that you've gained during all these years, have you been able to then again bring it back home and kind of use it on your own life?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel so fortunate to do this work, because I'm always growing. I'm always gaining new insights and new understandings. And, I think that the person of the therapist is one of the most important factors in therapy. In other words, like, you can't take someone where you haven't been yourself, and you can only go as far as you've been able to go within your own experience. And because of that, I'm always mindful to be doing my own work, whether that's being in therapy myself, using the tools that I encourage my clients to use, whether it's meditation, whether it's journaling, whether it's breath work, whether it's whatever it might be. I'm always in the mindset of applying those things with myself, and that supports me being able to support my clients. And also, what my clients are going through is always inspiring and influencing me on my own kind of journey as a person. So for sure, it absolutely is the kind of thing where the professional becomes the personal and the personal the professional.
Right. Yeah. That's a concept that, I mean, for me, when I first started getting help, that was a concept that blew my mind. And I know that I have friends that I've told this to, and they're like, what? Like the idea that a therapist has a therapist, because again, there's this idea that therapists are like this entity that aren't human beings. There's some weird like disconnect there where we just kind of put therapists on this huge pedestal and assume that, one, you have all the answers to everything, which is so unfair, and two, you don't need therapy yourself. You can hear all these stories from all these different backgrounds, all this trauma, and you won't need your own therapist. I love hearing stuff like that, because it kind of lets people who are listening know, like, no, like, everyone is living a human experience. Like, you have to remember that. And then when I figured that out, I think that actually helped with my therapy. Like
Wow.
with the seventh therapist, like I was like, oh, this is a person. Like, that sounds terrible, but I was like, oh, this is a human being across from me.
Yeah.
It's not like a
Yeah.
robot or, something higher than me that's kind of analyzing my every move. It's like a person that's listening.
Yes. Yes. And that is such a good point. I think there are I have a lot of guesses as to where that comes from, like why there is this perception. I think some of it comes from our discipline and tradition, and we're kind of trained to be this blank slate. And earlier traditions of therapy and earlier approaches to therapy were very much the therapist almost like doesn't exist. It's just really truly like a wall, a blank slate who isn't contributing much to the process. And you're just kind of free associating and projecting onto this being who isn't showing up as a person in the space. So I think the origins of our tradition, in therapy maybe have influenced that. And I think also there's this sense of, you're coming in so vulnerable to this expert, this professional. And so there is this kind of dynamic there that I think has us hold therapists in this, in this regard that excludes their humanness. And then I think inadvertently, in a way to mitigate our own vulnerability, therapists, sometimes we put a wall up, right? And we show up in a certain way, invulnerable or as experts, and we forget to bring our humanness into the room. And so I think it all contributes. And I love hearing that that's transformed your experience of therapy, to remember that it is a person in front of you. And it also suggests to me that this seventh therapist is showing their humanness.
Yeah, no, she was really cool. She, I wish I was still in contact with her. I hate to admit, I forget her name, and I forgot. I don't know
You're
what.
So memorable.
Yeah, you can tell right now. I have a great memory, but I think it was during the whole process, because I went on antidepressants and there was just a lot going on where my head was spinning the whole time. I remember I would have to email every week, going email the service place. And I was like, what's my therapist's name again? And they're like, you still don't know? I'm like, man, I don't know anything right now. I'm like, I'm in a weird spot. And on that note, do you ever deal with do you ever experience clients who are experiencing like disassociation and stuff like that?
For sure. Yeah. Dissociation is really common. It's really common in trauma and, and after trauma. It's really common with severe forms of depression and anxiety. So I do see people dissociating quite a bit, and I'm, fairly well trained at being able to identify, what dissociation looks like and what it feels like when I'm in the room with someone who is, dissociating. And I use a mindfulness-based approach in my work. So mindfulness is very much infused in the majority of my actual interventions. And so I try to address dissociation pretty directly with people to support them in being able to ground themselves and get back in their bodies and sort of learn what it feels like to be dissociated, and also develop on a broader scale, develop the ability to stay present and not have to split, when things get overwhelming. So it's something I encounter quite regularly.
Have you seen an increase of it since this whole mess of the last 2 years has happened?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, our threshold is not high enough to be able to metabolize this amount of fear and overwhelm and anxiety. And also we have so much 24-hour access to what's happening in the world. And, the pandemic is just one thing that we're being exposed to that's sort of tragic and overwhelming on like an existential level. And that hits us, with such heavy emotional charge. And we're just not meant to metabolize that much, so we can't. And when we can't, and we don't have the resources to be able to recognize that, let alone cope with that, then yeah, dissociation becomes a tool to support us. I mean, dissociation is helpful before it becomes detrimental. It's actually a resource, to help protect ourselves and buffer the impact of overwhelm. So yeah, for sure, I'm seeing a lot more of it these days.
Right. Now, how can people like back home who are listening, if they have, because we talked about this off camera, the impact that this is going to have long term on young kids because of, they don't have any of those child skills that most kids grow up, like social skills, and they've barely been in school, and then they go in and they're pulled out again. They barely see anyone's face because everyone has masks on. There's just a lot of weird stuff going on. Like if I was 5 right now, I'd be very confused. So how can parents back home I don't even know how to put this. Like, how can they kind of help their child transition positively moving forward? Like we were talking about how their outlook on life is going to be, it's going to be hard to motivate these kids, not just the younger ones, but the kids who are like 13 to 15 right now, who are actually very socially conscious. It's going to be hard to motivate them because it's like, hey, look at all this crap in the world. You're living in it now. Have fun. So
Yeah.
how can parents like keep them confident in going forward? Because there's a lot of this mentality where it's like, what's the point?
Yeah, totally. And it's a tricky one, right? I mean, I think the answer to that lies somewhere in, if we're talking about what can parents do, first of all, is for parents to be really taking care of themselves. Not to say that that's first and foremost, but also to say, yeah, that is first and foremost, right? Because we've got to manage ourselves if we're going to be able to hold that space appropriately for kids to feel, safer, or put them at ease. We have to work with our own energy, right? And so I think we're all going through it together, all of us, and so it's like the same with therapists and their clients. Like therapists really have to be working extra hard right now to take care of themselves because they're the instrument, right? So you got to be fine-tuning your instrument so that you can do this work proficiently. And same thing with parents, right? And that's a big job right now because there's a lot that's happening, right? And so I think for parents to really be taking as good of care of themselves as possible, to be able to be grounded enough to connect with their children on an emotional level and understand what's happening for them emotionally. And I think the answer also lives in the both and. In other words, kind of both meeting kids where they're at and encouraging them to be here now and work with what's present now, whether it's anxiety, big emotions, fears, connecting with that and having those conversations, and also having a mind toward what these kids might be feeling about the future. And so like if you've got a kid who's getting ready to graduate from high school, encouraging the kids to be hopeful about the future and make plans for the future and trust that there's going to be a future, and encourage them to feel that they have a contribution to make for the future, toward a better future, and also being with what they're experiencing right now and encouraging that kind of present moment awareness and being with the here and now at the same time that you're encouraging a hope that there will be a future.
Right.
Not an easy job.
No.
Not an easy job.
No, I can't. I don't have kids, so I can only imagine. But I think there's two sides to the whole impact on kids. I think it depends on how we approach it with them. This could end up making them more resilient and more conscious and more aware of everything, not just in their self, but on current events. And I think that could be a benefit depending on how we approach this thing.
I think so too. I agree. And I'm seeing young people now already just equipped with so much more consciousness. I like that you use that word, and so much more awareness than I remember having as a young person. So I think it already is manifesting in them as this broader, more kind of expanded, systemic, conscious awareness that does have a lot of, positive attributes associated with it, and a lot of, potential benefits associated with it. And there's the other side of it too. It's existentially heavy, and young people are processing more than they have the equipment to be able to process, and it's beyond their developmental capacity, and it's developmentally inappropriate really for kids to have to be thinking about all this stuff. And yet, here we are. Regretfully, this is part of, what they're dealing with. So I think it will be double-edged for sure. And I think the more aware and mindful we as adults can be of that, the better we can support them in kind of going through this difficult time.
Yeah, I think for me, putting myself in the shoes of a kid right now, if I looked up to my parents and they were level-headed and grounded and going, there's gonna be a better day than what we're doing right now, I think that would help tremendously, as opposed to, them not taking care of themselves and putting all their energy into me and then visibly looking more drained and stressed than before.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yeah, because as kids, we look to our parents at every level to figure out, like, am I okay?
Yeah.
If you're not okay, then I definitely can't be okay because I'm relying on you, so it's huge. If you feel like your parents are losing it, and shoot, if we're losing it right now, we come by it really honestly, because things are tough and things are scary, so it's not to say that it's by any measure easy for parents to be grounded right now, or for any of us to be grounded and level-headed right now. But if we can work at that, you're right, I think it does go a long way for kids.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this story came to mind when you were talking about how kids are, they've got more tools and they're more conscious than you ever were before. I mean, like, me too. I remember, like, I didn't know the word depression until university, but we did a swim meet with my kids, and this one kid, he's 10, and he did a race. And after, I was like, how you feeling, bud? And he goes, I am both drained mentally and physically. And I was like, the fact that you know what being mentally drained is pretty, like, there's no way, because you only did 2 lengths, but the fact that you're acknowledging that is crazy.
That's incredible.
At 10. I was like,
That's incredible.
such a strange response. That's not what I was expecting.
I love that.
If I was in that spot, like, if you brought 10-year-old Harry, I'd be like, I'm tired. But this guy's like, I am mentally drained. What?
What facility at 10 years old? That's amazing.
I know. So the future is bright, but also it depends on, like we said, how we navigate it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what we're experiencing in the moment is going to influence how we see it, right? What we're feeling here and now is influencing how we're seeing the prospect of the future, right? Because we're looking through the prism of whatever our emotions are in the moment. So again, it goes back to, like, how do we manage ourselves? How do we manage this anxiety? How do we manage this fear, so that we can hopefully have a clear lens through which to look at the prospect of a future and not catastrophize it, and also, just be gentle with ourselves about the fact that it's kind of, scary and grim at times.
The being gentle with yourself. Oh man, because I need to remind myself of that every day, is like, be kind to yourself, bro. Because I told you yesterday, I had a meltdown with all the lockdown news. I just called my mom and I screamed for like half an hour. I was like, the world is fucked. Like, I was like, we're going down. The ship is sinking. And I just, like, I felt like Chicken Little, where he's like, the sky is falling. And everyone's like, what is wrong with, like, shut up, little chicken. So it's like, it definitely influences how you view the world, but you gotta be nice to yourself, because I did that. And then I felt bad for myself for like maybe a minute. And then I clicked. I was like, wait, be kind to yourself. You're allowed to feel that way.
Yeah.
And then I ultimately felt better. But you're gonna have moments. I feel like I'm a pretty average Joe, right? So you're gonna have moments like that if you're anything like me, where you're just like, you want to scream at the top of your head and go like, why is the world dying? It's just, be nice to yourself.
Totally. I think it's the move from, like, it's okay to, like, it's not okay and that's okay. Do you know what I mean? Like, where you don't want to force yourself to go like, nope, it's fine. It feels like, a dumpster fire, but like, everything's great. I got this. You don't want to lie to yourself. You don't want to unravel either, right? Because that kind of groundlessness, is so overwhelming and impossible to work with. But yeah, you want to meet yourself where you're at. There's this place in the middle that says, like, no, it's really not okay right now. And that's okay for me to not be okay right now. I feel terrified, and it's okay. I'm going to try to hold myself in this feeling of being terrified. And then somehow, paradoxically, it's like, by embracing it, it sort of passes more quickly, as opposed to, you get stuck in it when you resist it, or when you get consumed in it.
Isn't that strange? Once you admit that it's happening, it doesn't feel so bad. Like, yeah, I feel like garbage. And then you're like, oh, it's kind of nice to say that.
Yeah, I feel better now. Oh,
Huh,
something to
how's that?
that.
Look how that works. I think the last question I have for you, Denise, there was this blog post that you wrote from 2019, and I feel like for me personally, I relate to it heavy. And you were talking about how to stay centered at at the end of the year, because you mentioned like, and I feel felt this even this year, like from Thanksgiving to New Year's goes like with in the blink of an eye. It's almost like, where did that time go and what am I doing? So, as we get into the new year, I feel like people, on the topic of disassociation, I feel like people are feeling this especially now because they're trying to disassociate from all this stressful news and all this craziness in the world, that they're going to get into 2022 and go, what? Because
Yeah.
I'm not even going to lie. Some days I'm all jokes aside, I'm still mentally in 2020. Like I'll see 2021 on the calendar and go, what? When did that happen? And it's December. So how, like, in your opinion, how should people who are feeling that, because this is going to come out in January, how should people that are listening to this feeling, how is it 2022? How should they navigate that feeling so that they can have a more stable and more peace of mind in 2022?
Well, that's such a challenging question because I'm so in that with you, right? So it's
Mm,
like, oof, I'm feeling that. I'm feeling that hard. I mean, I think for me, it all roads lead to what can you do to be here now, to slow down and ground yourself and be here now and release, at least for the moment, release attachment to the number on the calendar, release attachment to the story of we just went through this and we went through that and it was, and we lost these years, and, release social media for a moment, release the memes, that remind you of, of like the fact that you're, what is it? Like we're in our junior year of the pandemic. Like, let that go.
who says that? Who-
That's a thing.
no,
That is a like a terrifying thing that's spinning
throw that
through.
out.
Exactly. Put that right in the garbage and let that go and just try to come into your body and come into your present moment and come into the day that you're having and keep it small. Keep the focus small and keep the focus grounded in here, now, at most today. And if we can just sort of bring it into the one day at a time, how can I show up for myself today? Forget that it's whatever, January 1st, 2022, or, forget that it's May 5th, 2022. Like, let go of the story and let go of what that means as much as you can. Try to release that and just try to bring yourself into, where's my body right here, right now? Where's my breath? And let me let that breath move in and let me let that breath move out. And just the power of that has a tendency to slow things down. And when we slow things down, we bring ourselves into here and now, and we work with what we can work with, which is only ever here and now. We can't work with big concepts like today or a year. Like that's just a mental game that causes anxiety and overwhelm and powerlessness. We can't work with anything beyond this moment here and now. Right. And we don't need to think beyond, this moment or today. So if we can just kind of bring it down a bit, bring it down into what we can work with. I think that can help a lot. And if that becomes a practice and that becomes, a consistent habit that we return to of grounding our energy in here and now and working with one day at a time, it kind of slows things down a bit and makes time feel a bit more of a friend than an enemy, and if you're, think about it, not that this is possible, but if you could manage to be fully aware in each and every moment and live each moment as it's happening, you end up having a lot of time, and like a
Right.
year is really long if you're there for
Yeah.
every single moment. Not that we can pull that off, nobody can, but if that becomes the aim, how can I be fully awake and fully present in this moment and just be in this moment? It does change our relationship with time. And then those stories of what date it is on the calendar or like what last year was or what next year is, like they matter a whole lot less.
Mm.
And our experience really kind of gets transformed by that. Is it easy? No. Is it a practice? Yes, every day, all the time. Is it worthwhile? I think so.
Right. So you're making decisions based on how you feel and what you're experiencing right now, as opposed to like a schedule that you made for yourself.
Yeah. And I think there's a place, there's a place for schedules and there's a place for plans. I think our brain needs that kind of
Right.
structure. And again, it's like there's so much of life that I think requires this both and, like, both have that structure and also like be willing to release that and just come into like, okay, what do I need right now? Like, what's going on in this moment? Because as soon as we start thinking too much about the future, we're at risk of feeling anxiety. And as soon as we start thinking too much about the past, we're at risk of feeling depression. It's like here and now, here and now, here and now is where the relief exists. And here and now is where life is happening. Only ever, only all the time. Like, it's only ever now. The rest is just mind stuff, So if we can just keep coming back to now, I think that's a resource that we can draw a lot of strength and resilience and peace and tranquility from.
Live in the now. I love it. That is where we're going to end off. Denise, where can my listeners find you in all of your practices?
So the best place to find me is at www.denisefournier.com. That's my personal blog. That'll connect you to my practice website. It'll connect you to a couple of courses, e-courses that I have available for people who maybe don't want to work with me in therapy or can't work with me in therapy, but want to do some work on themselves. You can find my blog there and my social media. So that's the best place to find me.
Perfect. And I'll put that link down below. Denise, thank you again for coming on. This has been a blast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been awesome.
And to all my listeners, I will see you guys next time.